friends, I am Arpit and I am here with today's analysis. Today is 14th of February and we are going to deal with two very important topics which are in news. Surrogacy in India. What is surrogacy? Surrogacy is a practice whereby a female bears and gives birth to a child for an intending couple and hands over that child to the intending couple after birth. India, at one point of time, was known as the rent on womb capital of the world, where many foreigners used to come here for surrogacy. But the government in 2015 banned this practice for the foreigners. In 2021, the government passed a law that is the Surrogacy Regulation Act, which allowed only the married, the separated, and the widowed women to have children via surrogacy and not the unmarried or single women. Now, an unmarried and single woman has approached the Supreme Court seeking her rights to become a mother via surrogacy. Let's see what the court says on this. Next is basically the Indian economy a review. Now, the Department of Economic Affairs every year releases economic survey prior to the budget. This year, the budget is basically an interim budget because of the elections. So, the government has not issued an economic survey as of now, but a precursor to it. And that precursor is basically named as the Indian Economy a Review. This has two chapters in it. First is what has been the journey of India's economy till now and what are we looking at in the times to come. The entire book or the entire publishing I'm not going to cover in today's video. I will be covering this in tits and bits in 3-4 videos. From today onwards, we'll run a series of it so that you get an idea about the economic situation right now, the macroeconomic situation of the country, and when in June or July the economic survey is released with the full budget, you will be able to understand that easily. We will be covering that also in detail. But yes, it is a precursor to economic survey, so we have to cover this as well. Let's begin with the first topic, that is surrogacy in India. Now, a woman has approached the Supreme Court seeking the right to have a child via surrogacy. And she is a single woman who is unmarried. Doesn't the law allow her? No, the law does not allow her. There is a law which only allows married women, separated or divorced women, and the third is widowed women to become a mother via surrogacy. And that law is the Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021, which permits only married couples or only a woman who is a widow or a divorcee between the age of 35 to 45 years to have children through surrogacy. It does not allow a single, never married woman to use surrogacy for having children. The Supreme Court is hearing this case, and the Supreme Court also has a counter argument to this, that why you want to become a mother via surrogacy, you can adopt children. There are other means also to have children. This is what the court has to say as of now, but let's see how this case proceeds. But to understand this, we need to know exactly what the law is, what are the rules and regulations with respect to the law, and then only we will be able to understand this particular case better as it progresses. So, first of all, we need to know what is surrogacy. The Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021 itself defines surrogacy as a practice where a woman bears and gives birth to a child for an intending couple. Now, this is that woman who is pregnant. This is the intending couple. This intending couple has chosen this woman as a surrogate mother in quest for a child. She will bear it in her womb for 9 months, give birth to this child, and hand over that child to the intending couple. This is what actually surrogacy means. This lady is known as the surrogate mother. This couple is known as the intending couple who are intending to have child who are intending to become parents. Now, India at one point of time was known as rent on womb capital. We might have seen that movie also. Mimi is the name of that movie, where foreigners used to come. They used to look for surrogate mothers. They used to pay them hefty amounts in lakhs and rent the womb. Many a times it also happened, like in that movie also it happened, that the foreigners never returned back to take the baby. Now the responsibility of the baby, who will take? Will the future of the baby or will that future of that newborn be in doldrums? Those were many questions which were there in front of the government. And that is why government in 2015 first of all banned foreigners from coming to India and going for surrogacy. They are currently banned. And in 2021 they passed a law for surrogacy, and according to that law only this definition is there. Now, this means that surrogacy in India is allowed for Indians, but there are certain terms and conditions. So we need to look into those terms and conditions as well. So first of all, let us see how this happens. So the eggs from intended parent. So first of all, we need to understand that surrogacy will happen only when there are some complexities or medical complexities either in the father or in the mother or in both. Then we will also have to look into these kind of complexities, that whether the sperm of the father or the egg of the mother from the intending couple, are they not capable enough to produce an embryo? If they are not capable enough, then they can go for donated eggs or donated sperms for creating the embryo. If they are capable enough, the female's egg and the male's sperm is capable enough of creating an embryo, then also they can go for this surrogacy. Why? Because in this situation, when the eggs and the sperm are capable enough, maybe the womb is not capable enough to hold that embryo for 9 months and develop the baby. That level of complexity can also be there. So in that case also a surrogate is needed. So a surrogate is needed in two conditions. First of all, either the sperm or the eggs, they are not capable enough to form an embryo. In that case, you need donation. And second of all, if the womb, most importantly, is not capable of holding that baby for 9 months. That is the main condition. Because, you can take eggs and sperms and, have the baby in your womb if your womb is capable. But your womb is not capable, then you will have to go for a surrogate mother. That is the main condition, that is why. So, eggs from intended parent or donor eggs, sperm from intended parent or donor sperm is there, fused. The embryo is created by IVF. IVF stands for in vitro fertilization. This in vitro fertilization is an artificial technique of fertilization where an embryo is created outside the body of the female, also known as test tube baby it is. And then once embryo is created, this embryo is planted inside the female's body. In this case, the female is the surrogate mother because the female over here, the womb is not capable of holding this. So, via this in vitro fertilization, this embryo is planted inside the surrogate mother, which bears this embryo for 9 months, gives birth to the child and hands over this child to the intending parents. This is how this surrogacy happens. Now, 2021, we know that a law has been created, a law has been formulated for that. Now, what are the bodies created for regulation under this law? First is the National Assisted Reproductive Technology and Surrogacy Board. Now, as I mentioned about IVF, in vitro fertilization, is an assisted reproductive technology where external assistance is needed for reproducing. Now, this body is created, and minister in charge of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare is the chairman of this board. What are the functions of this board? Advising the central government on policy matters, to review and monitor the implementation of the act, to lay down the code of conduct for surrogacy clinics, to set minimum standards of physical infrastructure, laboratory and diagnostic equipment and expert manpower to be employed by surrogacy clinics, to oversee the performance of various bodies constituted under the act, because this is one such body. Apart from it, there are other bodies also constituted under the act. This is the apex body. And to supervise the functioning of state assisted reproductive technology. This is like another body. State assisted reproductive technology and surrogacy boards in each state have to be formulated, or each states have to be created. They will be looking for, or they will be looking over the surrogacy clinics. The surrogacy clinics have to register themselves with the state boards. State boards have to report to the national board. This is, I would say, the administrative structure created as per this law to oversee and regulate surrogacy in the country as per the Surrogacy Regulation Act of 2021. What are the regulations? First of all, commercial surrogacy is prohibited. What is commercial surrogacy? Basically, it includes monetary benefits or reward. You know, what the foreigners were doing, they were coming to India, they were looking for surrogate mothers, they were giving them lakhs of rupees. That monetary benefit is involved in commercial surrogacy. So in 2015, it was banned for foreign nationals. It is banned for Indians also, according to the law. You cannot pay anyone for becoming a surrogate mother. But you have to only pay the basic medical expenses and insurance coverage. Insurance cover you have to take for 3 years of the surrogate mother if you are an intending couple. That is the only thing you have to pay. You cannot pay the surrogate mother. The surrogate mother cannot demand also. Earlier it was legalized in 2002, after which India became the rent on womb capital of the world. It backfired. So, however, due to lack of proper laws and safeguards for the parties involved, multiple ethical and legal challenges arose. Like I told you that some intending couples never returned back to India for claiming the child, for taking the child. That basically became a problem. So commercial surrogacy all in all is banned. For foreigners, so it was banned in 2015. For Indians also it is banned. You cannot pay anyone. It is like this. Altruistic surrogacy is allowed. What is altruistic surrogacy? It involves no monetary compensation to the surrogate mother other than medical expenses and insurance coverage during the pregnancy. So this is basically allowed, and it is suggested that some of the relatives should be sought for becoming a surrogate mother of the intending couple. Registration of surrogacy clinics have been made compulsory, and they have to register themselves with the state boards. So these are the regulations under the law. Next is the rules. These rules were made in 2022. The law was passed in 2021. The rules were made in 2022. Number of attempts any surrogacy procedure or on a surrogate mother shall not be more than 3 times. So it can happen that this assistive reproductive technology, ART, you plant an embryo, that embryo fails to grow in a surrogate mother. And again you plant, it fails to grow. Again you plant, it fails to grow. So maximum 3 times only you can attempt this on any surrogate mother. This is written. A surrogate mother may be allowed for abortion during surrogacy in accordance with the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act 1971 as advised by the doctor. So there is a proper mechanism for going for medical termination of pregnancy. If there are complications, she can go for medical termination of pregnancy. A surrogate mother has to give her consent through an agreement for giving up all her rights over the child and shall hand over the child or children to the intending couple. It is not like she starts claiming rights over the child, the surrogate mother, after giving birth to that child. No, she cannot. She has to sign that undertaking before going for all these procedures. And she has to hand over that child either to the intending couple, most of the cases it will be, or a person appointed by the intending couple in case of their separation, during her pregnancy, or in case of death, or both. The survivor in case of a death of one of the intending couple during pregnancy. So, if one of the couple dies, the survivor will have rights over that child. If they are separated, then they will, beforehand claim कि भाई, if we are separated in this case, the child will go to whoever they are nominating. So all these are written over there. Intending couples will need to purchase a general health insurance cover in favor of the surrogate mother for a period of 36 months, that is 3 years, from an insurance company or agent recognized by IRDA. These are the rules which are there for surrogacy, which we need to understand. So let's see now how the Supreme Court responds to that unmarried single mother who is claiming her rights to become a mother via surrogacy. Her claim is that if divorced are allowed, widowed are allowed, then why not unmarried single women are allowed? So let's see what the Supreme Court says on this. Now coming to this next topic, the Indian economy, a review. Now this was compiled by the Government of India, Department of Economic Affairs in January 2024. It takes stock of the state of the Indian economy, its journey over the years, specifically in the last 10 years. So there's a comparison done from 1950 to 2014 and from 2014 till now. This comparison is there in this book. Is this the economic survey? No, it is a precursor to the economic survey. Economic survey will be released when the full scale budget will be released. Before that. And this is very important to understand. We are not covering, or we will not be able to cover the entire edition in one go. So we will be doing it in series. So today, tomorrow, likewise on the trot for 3-4 days, I will be covering this. So it is like this. The Indian economy, past, present and future. Now over the course of last decade means 2014 till now, India has showcased robust and resilient growth. India has become the world's fastest growing economy, no doubt about this fact. And India has braved various situations like the COVID came, geopolitical crises were there, but Indian economy kept on growing. We will definitely look into the factors what led India's economy to be resilient, fast-paced and dynamic. Not today, but tomorrow. What will we see today is that what has been the history of the economic growth from 1950 till 2014. And in tomorrow's video, we will be covering post 2014 what has been done. So here we will be covering decade by decade. 1950s, what was there, 1960s, what was there, 70s, what was there, 80s, 90s, like this. Starting with the 1950s. Now, one statistic which actually is disturbing for Indians is that when the Britishers came here, India's contribution in the global GDP was 22.6% in 1700. And it became 3.8% in 1952. Where was India? And before the Britishers came in, and where is India now? So this is what is needed to be understood. It is disturbing actually. Now at this time, what was the kind of strategy which was adopted by the newly independent Indian government? 1952 there was first general election also. So first of all, we decided that we will be going for a planned economy module which was there in the USSR. Second of all, we said that we will be focusing on heavy industrialization. So let's see. The government in the 1950s adopted a strategy aimed at achieving economic sufficiency. We needed to achieve economic sufficiency to, reduce our dependence upon others. We were more inward looking. Even if we did not want to integrate our economy with the world, these were some of the learnings, I would say, from the past. This period was characterized by rapid industrialization, which involved raising a massive amount of resources and investing them in creation of large industrial state-owned enterprises. This was basically the second 5-year plan. The Mahalanobis plan it was known as. The idea was that go for heavy industrialization, go for creating capital goods, machineries and all. These machineries will be installed in factories. More and more jobs will be generated and things will be better. Now in this decade, the average growth rate was 3.9%. The economy grew by this much. So keep a note of this. We will be looking into the average growth rate for every decade. Okay. So this was the decade where we much too much focusing on the heavy industrial development. Not by the private sector but by the state-owned enterprises, the PSUs and all. Now the 1960s where it came. Next decade. It witnessed the Indian economy going through several doldrums. Doldrums means difficult situations. 1962 Sino-Indian War, 1965 India-Pakistan War. These two wars happened, and whenever wars happen, economies are definitely impacted. Severe droughts, 1962, 63, 64. All these years witnessed droughts, which led us to import food grains. 75% of our food grain requirement was being imported. And that was the time when we started the Green Revolution as well. So that turned out to be beneficial for us in the longer run. Then high rates of taxation. The government decided to compensate these wars and all through high rates of taxation. That actually was not too much beneficial for the economy. Here, the decadal growth rate was more than the previous decade, and it was 4.1% in the 1960s. Here it was 3.9%. 1950s 3.9%, 1960s 4.1%. 1970s, it witnessed a devaluation of Indian rupee by sharp 57%. It was devalued. The decade was also characterized by severe political instability and curtailing of civil liberties, including the imposition of emergency in 1975. This happened. 75 June it was imposed till 77 April or March it was there. Now it was a decade of several volatilities, and those volatilities were also severe at the global level, like the oil shocks of the 1970s. The first oil shock, 1973, Yom Kippur War, basically the Arab-Israel War, and the second was 1979, the Iran Revolution. Now this oil shocks of the 1970s actually reduced or hampered the oil supply in the world, which definitely had a direct impact on the economies of those respective states dependent upon oil imports from these West Asian countries, and India definitely was one among them. All of these developments resulted in a sharp downfall in the decadal average growth rate, and it was 2.9% here. So 3.9, 4.1, 2.9% in the 1970s. Now comes the 1980s. Now in the 1980s, we started realizing one thing, that our economy is too much closed. We need to integrate with the world. We need to do some reforms in our economies. Although we might all have heard about LPG reforms which happened in the 1990s decade, 1991 it happened, but in 1980s some things started to happen. Now this slowdown was also reversed. Slowdown means in the previous decade we saw the rate of growth was reduced? It was reversed during the 1980s, primarily driven by the initiation of some reform measures aimed at increasing domestic competitiveness. First is the removal of price controls. Next is initiation of fiscal reforms. It started. Revamp of the public sector. Reduction in import duties to encourage imports and delicensing of domestic industries. All these started to happen in the 1980s. Now, as part of the greater integration with the global economy, measures were taken to promote exports as well. Maruti Suzuki was established here. Brands like Coca-Cola were here. So all these things started to happen. There was also a notable change in entrepreneurial mindset, fostering a more innovative and business-oriented environment in the country, where private sector was being promoted as compared to the public sector earlier. The modest liberalization combined with massive government spending led to the GDP growth rate improved to 5.7% in the 1980s, 3.9% 1950s, 4.1% 1960s, 2.9% 1970s, 5.7% 1980s. It was basically a jinx for the Indian economy. The Indian economy's growth rate was not able to cross 5%. Many economists had termed it as the Hindu rate of growth. For the first time in the 1980s, the economic growth rate surpassed 5.7% due to some structural reforms which were initiated. Now, 1990s. There were shocks at the global level in the starting of 1990s, like for example, the disintegration of USSR when the Cold War ended, the Iraq-Kuwait war in West Asia. Again, it led to rising up of oil prices, hampering supply of oil. All these things did happen. They adversely contributed to the economic situations of the country. But yes, let us see what all happened. The external crisis, unsustainable government spending, and internal socio-political environment led to the balance of payment crisis for the country, which demanded a bold response to the rejuvenation of the economy. Therefore, liberalization, privatization, and globalization reforms were adopted. Now, people were allowed to do business without taking license from the government. Many sectors of the government, which were earlier reserved for the public sector only, were now opened for the private sector. And many sectors of the economy in which foreign investments were not allowed was now allowed. Means India's economy got integrated with the world economy better. Now, this happened, things started to grow, but the East Asian financial crisis in the second half of 1990s, they crept in and they hampered the growth. Now the Indian economy is globalized or getting globalized, so any event happening anywhere will have more disastrous or drastic impacts on the Indian economy as well. Then the slowdown in agricultural growth was also witnessed because of lower than normal monsoon years. There were some El Nino years over here. Some slackening in the pace of structural reforms. Actually, these LPG reforms which were taken out, they were not taken out at one go. Some of the reforms were taken out in 1991, some of the reforms were taken out in 1998, and those reforms taken out in 1991 were not properly implemented. So there was some slackening. Frequent changes of governments also did happen, which we saw during the later half of the 1990s. BJP government coming to power, or the NDA government coming to power, then the Congress government coming to power. Like this turmoil, political turmoil was there, political stability was not there. Monetary tightening happened. This happens when inflation is too high. The RBI rises the repo rate. This monetary tightening reduces the money supply, thereby reducing economic activity in the economy. So this also happened. RBI adopted this monetary tightening policy, and hence due to all these events, despite of the LPG reforms, the growth rate was not so much higher although it was higher than the previous decade. Previous decade was witnessed 5.7%, now is 5.8%. So this is what the scenario was. 3.9 1950s, 4.1 1960s, 2.9 1970s, 5.7 1980s, 5.8 1990s. Now comes the 2000s. Now the early part of 2000s, it witnessed sustained momentum in domestic economic activity. The momentum was there and it kept on growing. Better corporate performances were there. A conducive investment climate was there in India, where many countries wanted to invest in India, and positive sentiments for India as preferred investment destination. So all this started happening. There was also a global growth boom and capital flows into India, means FDI into India and FPI also, it also boomed. Apart from it, schemes like Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan for improving education and skill levels, National Rural Health Mission to ensure quality health care to the rural people, National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme (MGNREGS) we know it as, in 2005 this was passed. These were also there into place. But 2008 there was a global financial crisis. The epicenter of these global financial crises this time was none other than the world's largest economy, USA. These crises are also known as subprime lending crisis, where the banks and financial institutions disbursed loans to the people without knowing their repaying capabilities. So, there were many loan defaults by the people in USA. And there were many loans disbursed in India also during that time. Bad debts began to pile up in India as well. But India was not that much impacted as other economies of the world were impacted. One major factor which saved us was the domestic demand, which kept the productivity sustained. Another factor was the high savings rate of India. Around 25 to 30% is the savings rate of India currently also and at that time also. And this savings rate saved Indians from this particular crisis or the bad impacts of this crisis. And here in this decade, the decadal average growth rate was 6.3%. We are seeing it for the first time surpass beyond 6%. So it is like this. And the last is 2009 to 2014. Now, since this document is released by the government, so it will be taking into account the performance of the present government in the center, and that was from 2014 onwards, which we will see in tomorrow's class. Now, 2009 to 2014. During this period, the government tried to sustain high growth by running high fiscal deficits and keeping monetary policy too loose for long. Now, when the monetary policy is too loose means there is more money into circulation. When the fiscal deficit is high means government spending has increased. When the government spending has increased, so there is more money in the economy. So more economic activity will be witnessed. High inflation will also be witnessed. So nominal GDP is that GDP which does not take into account the impact of inflation. Real GDP takes into account the impact on inflation. The nominal GDP growth was high because of high inflation. Now, let's suppose a product costing 100 rupees, it is produced, the contribution to the GDP is 100 rupees. But what if due to inflation, the cost of that product is 120 rupees? The raw material has become expensive due to inflation. The cost of that material also goes up. So you will say, yeah, 120 rupees is now the cost. So 120 rupees is being, I would say, contributed in the GDP. So you will see the GDP rising, but that rise is due to inflation. So nominal GDP growth was high because of high inflation. India experienced annual double-digit inflation rates for 5 years from 2009 to 14. This was something which is alarming. Now presently the inflation rate somewhere is around 5%. But at that time it was in double digits. Now, when inflation is too high, after a certain point of time, the spending capacity of the persons it reduces, thereby leading to reduced demand, thereby leading to reduced productivity and reduced GDP. This is what actually happens, and it started to happen. The country had to contend with high twin deficits, high fiscal deficit and high current account deficit. Fiscal deficit was 4.9%, current account deficit 4.8%. And the rupee was overvalued at that time. It all came to a head in 2013 and the Indian rupee crashed against the US dollar. Between 2009 and 14, the Indian rupee depreciated annually by 5.9%. Economic growth also stalled because we are an import dependent economy. Majority of our oil is imported, and where our currency is depreciating, our imports will become more expensive, and this started happening, which led to more inflation, that led to stalling in the growth. That is what happened during 2009 to 2014. So this has been the story from 1950 till 2014 of the Indian economy in a nutshell. I will be dealing with the story from here on in tomorrow's session. This document is released by the government, so you will not see any criticisms of the economic policies or activities done by the government. However, it is important to know the shortcomings as well, but since we are covering this, so it is important to know that this is right. This is something which we need to know and follow, but this is the only thing which is right. It is not there. It is not to be believed. There are certain shortcomings, but these kind of shortcomings are generally not mentioned in these kind of documents released by the government. We need to understand this. Okay, so this is it from today's session. I will be meeting you tomorrow now with more such informative news pieces, and we'll continue this series of ours which have started today. Till then, you guys very well know what to do. Not repeating it today. Namaste. Jai Hind.